The hallway shook with the chant of young voices, the word justice bouncing off lockers and ceilings. The sound grew louder with each passing second, until it was no longer a whisper of resistance but a roar of defiance. Phones captured every angle, videos streamed live. The truth was not just in one boy's hand anymore. It was everywhere. The teacher stood frozen near the far wall, her face pale, her hands trembling, the smirk she once wore long gone. The principal leaned against the doorframe of his office, his eyes hollow, his career crumbling before him. And the board members stood in the middle of the hall, powerless against the tide of voices rising all around them. The mother stood tall in the center of it all, her daughter by her side. The girl's bare head gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Not a mark of humiliation anymore, but a crown of courage. She clung to her mother's hand, but her chin was lifted, her eyes steady. The shame that once bowed her down was gone. Replaced with pride and strength, the boy with the phone stood close too, his chest rising and falling fast. But he no longer looked afraid. He looked ready. One board member raised a hand, shouting over the chant, "Silence! We need order. We will handle this matter through proper channels." But the chant only grew louder. "Justice! Justice!" The voices of the children would not be silenced. The mother's voice cut through the storm, her words sharp as steel. "Proper channels?" Those channels buried complaints, silenced staff, protected cruelty. Today, the only channel left is truth. Her words struck like thunder. The students cheered, some stamping their feet against the floor. The hallway shook with their rhythm. The teacher tried to speak, her voice shrill. "They don't understand. These children need discipline. They need to be taught respect," but her words only fueled the chant. Students booed, some shouted back, "Not like that. You're a bully. You're done." The teacher's face twisted, her eyes darting wildly, searching for protection. But no one stepped forward. Even the principal looked away. The staff member who had spoken earlier stepped forward, his voice loud. "You were warned. We all knew. But no one had the courage to stop you. Today that ends." His eyes locked on the teacher. "You don't belong here. You never did." The teacher's lips trembled, her hands clenching at her sides, her authority stripped away. The weight of years of cruelty collapsing on her shoulders. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed suddenly. The crowd parted, and 2 security officers appeared, their uniforms crisp, their expressions hard. The hallway fell into a hush. The officers walked directly to the teacher, one speaking firmly. "You need to come with us." His voice was final. The teacher shook her head, panic rising. No, this is a mistake. I was only—" But before she could finish, one officer gripped her arm, the other gesturing toward the exit. "Now!" The command was sharp. Phones lifted higher, students recording every second. The teacher's protests faded as she was led down the hall, her steps stumbling, her face pale with fear. Her humiliation now complete. The very hall where she once ruled with cruelty was the same hall that now echoed with her downfall. The girl watched silently, her heart pounding. The image seared into her mind. The teacher who had stripped her dignity was now stripped of her own. The principal tried to speak, his voice weak. "Please, this is not the way—" But the mother's glare silenced him, her voice firm. "You let this happen, you let her thrive, and now you will answer for it too." The board members shifted uncomfortably, whispers spreading among them, some pale with guilt, others trying to hide their fear. The mother's voice rose again, this time addressing the students, her tone strong. "Never let anyone steal your voice. Not a teacher, not a principal, not anyone. Your voice is your power, and today you proved it." The students erupted into cheers, the chant shifting into claps and whistles, the sound of triumph. The girl's cheeks flushed with warmth, not from shame, but from pride. She stood taller, her mother's arm around her shoulders. The boy with the phone grinned faintly. His courage rewarded, the staff member sighed deeply. Years of silence finally broken. The board members huddled, their voices low. But it was clear their control was slipping. The truth was already outside these walls. Videos online, parents' phones buzzing with messages. The storm had spread too far to contain. The mother turned toward them one last time, her voice calm but final. "You will not bury this. You will not hide it behind closed doors. Every parent will know, every voice will be heard. If you care about this school, if you care about your own names, you will act swiftly because if you don't, we will, the board members exchanged glances. Some nodding reluctantly, their silence an admission of defeat. The mother took her daughter's hand and began to walk down the hall, the crowd parting for them. Phones raised high, faces filled with respect. The girl's steps were steady now, no longer heavy with shame. She looked at her mother and whispered softly, "Thank you." Her mother smiled faintly, her voice warm. "No thank you for standing, for enduring, for being stronger than anyone realized." As they walked, students clapped, some shouted words of encouragement. "You're brave. You're strong." The girl's heart swelled. Her bare head no longer felt like a loss. It felt like a mark of survival, of victory. The hallway stretched before them, brighter now, filled with the sound of voices that once were silent but now roared with life. At the exit, the mother paused, turning back one last time, her voice carrying across the hall. "This is not the end. This is the beginning. The beginning of a school where children are safe, where cruelty is not tolerated, where voices rise instead of being silenced." Her words echoed as the doors opened, sunlight pouring in, a symbol of what lay ahead. The girl stepped outside with her mother, the fresh air filling her lungs, the weight lifted from her chest. Behind them, the school buzzed with noise, but ahead of them stretched freedom, justice, and the promise of change. Her mother's hand in hers, her head lifted high. She knew the humiliation she suffered would never be forgotten, but neither would the victory that followed. The teacher was gone, the principal broken, the board shaken, but the girl was still standing, stronger than before, and beside her stood her mother. The storm that had changed everything. Together they walked forward, leaving behind not just a memory of cruelty, but the birth of something far greater, hope. And as the doors closed behind them, the sound of clapping still rang in their ears, a sound that told them clearly the fight had been worth it, the silence was gone, and justice had finally arrived. The mother's lips curled into a grim line, her voice final. "It's over. The moment she put clippers to my child's head. It was over. The moment you chose silence. It was over. And now every parent, every student, every eye will see." Her daughter looked up at her, tears shining, but this time they were not of pain. They were of relief, of hope, of pride. The office door creaked again, more figures gathering outside. Curious students, worried staff, whispers flooding in. The tension in the room spilling into the hall, the storm was no longer contained. The school was buzzing with it, a secret too large to keep. The girl shifted in her chair, straightening her back, her bare head glinting under the harsh light. And for the first time, she didn't feel weak. She felt like a symbol. The staff member looked at her gently, his voice quiet. "You're brave," he said. "Braver than many of us who stayed quiet." She blinked at him, her lips trembling but curving into the faintest smile. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "She is more than brave," she said proudly. "She is the proof that no child should ever suffer this again." The principal leaned back, defeated, his voice a whisper. "You'll regret this." But the mother shook her head firmly, her voice filled with steel. "No, the only regret here is yours. The regret of protecting a monster instead of the children you were sworn to protect." She turned to her daughter and the boy, to the staff member beside them. "This is only the beginning. But we are not afraid." The girl held her mother's hand tightly, her heart racing but steady. The boy tucked the phone safely in his pocket, his resolve firm. The staff member stood tall for the first time in years, his silence broken. The principal's office no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the voices he had tried to suppress, voices that had finally risen, and as the door opened wider, the whispers outside growing louder, the truth spilling like wildfire through the halls, it was clear that the storm could not be stopped. The battle had left the office, spreading to every corner of the school, and soon it would reach far beyond these walls, far beyond the protection of the board, because justice, once awakened, does not sleep again. The hallway outside the principal's office was no longer quiet. Voices rose in clusters, the low hum of gossip spreading like wildfire. Students leaned against lockers, some standing on tiptoes to peek through the small glass window of the office door. Phones in their hands, messages flying through group chats faster than anyone could stop. She shaved her head, The mom is here. The principal is getting destroyed. The story was no longer hidden. It was alive, growing larger with every whisper. Inside, the mother stood strong, her daughter by her side. The staff member who had spoken up stood tall, too. And the boy with the phone still clutched the recording that could no longer be erased. The principal sat behind his desk, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. His authority stripped piece by piece. He looked less like a leader now and more like a man cornered, desperate and afraid. The mother turned toward the door, her voice calm but commanding. "We're done in here." "This will not be buried in four walls," she said, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. The staff member nodded, his eyes firm. The boy stepped closer, his lips tight but his expression filled with determination. The principal's eyes widened, his voice cracked. "Wait, think about what you're doing. If you take this out there, it will destroy everything, the school, the board, the community." His hands spread across the desk as if trying to pull them back. The mother turned, her eyes sharp as a blade, her voice strong. "No. She destroyed it the moment she touched my child. You destroyed it when you protected her. Today I only bring the truth into the light." Her words burned through the room. Her daughter's chest swelled with pride. For the first time since that cruel buzzing filled the classroom, she felt taller, stronger. The shame that weighed on her shoulders was shifting into something else. Defiance, the staff member walked toward the door, his voice steady. "Let them see, let them hear. It's time." He opened it wide, and the hallway noise poured in like a wave. Students fell silent for a second as the mother, her daughter, and their allies stepped into view. Then the whispers rose again, louder this time, phones lifted, eyes wide. The girl stood straighter, her bare head uncovered for all to see. The laughter that had mocked her before was gone, replaced by a hush of awe and unease. The mother's voice carried over the crowd, firm and unshaken. "Every parent will know. Every student will know. No more silence." Her words echoed against the lockers. Students leaned forward, listening, some nodding slowly, others glancing at each other with guilt in their eyes. They had laughed before, but now the truth was unavoidable. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed, and down the hallway came a group of adults, their suits crisp, their faces tense. School board members arriving earlier than anyone expected. The principal rushed from his office, his relief showing for a second. "Finally," he muttered. But his hope dimmed quickly when he saw the cold expressions on their faces. Whispers from the crowd reached them already, and some students were holding up phones, videos playing. One of the board members raised a hand, demanding silence, but silence did not come. The murmur of the students refused to die. The mother stepped forward, her daughter's hand in hers, her voice rising above the noise. "Look at her," she said, pointing to her child. "This is what your teacher did, this is what your principal allowed, and this is what your silence has protected." Her voice thundered through the hall. "You talk about order, about results, but tell me, is this your definition of education?" Gasps spread through the students. The board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them cleared his throat. "We need to investigate." But the boy with the phone stepped forward, his voice trembling but loud. "You don't need to investigate. It's right here." He held up his phone, the video playing again. The cruel buzzing, the teacher's smirk, the girl's humiliation, the laughter of classmates. Every sound cut deep, the crowd fell silent. Every eye fixed on the screen, the board members paled, their polished words faltering. The staff member who had joined the mother spoke loudly, his voice shaking but clear. "I filed reports, others filed reports, and every time they vanished, every time she was protected." He turned, his voice breaking with years of silence. "You let this go on, and now you see the cost." In her eyes, in her tears, in the pile of hair on the floor, the crowd of students erupted, their voices mixing into a chant. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" The sound grew louder. The board members tried to calm them, but the chant rose like thunder, rolling through the halls. The mother stood tall in the middle of it all, her daughter by her side, her face strong, unshaken. The principal stood at the edge, his hands trembling, his career collapsing in front of the very children he claimed to lead. The girl felt her chest swell, the fear that had crushed her now replaced by something new. Her humiliation had become a spark, And now that spark was a flame spreading through the school, she looked at her mother, who squeezed her hand and whispered softly, "You are not broken. You are the beginning." Her words gave the girl strength. She raised her chin, her bare head gleaming under the harsh lights, her eyes meeting the crowd without fear. A voice rose above the chant, sharp and bitter. The teacher herself appeared at the end of the hallway, her face pale, her eyes darting. "This is madness!" she shouted. But her words were drowned by the chant. "Justice! Justice!" the students roared louder. Their phones raised, recording, capturing every second. The teacher's face twisted. Her smirk gone, replaced by panic, she looked around, searching for allies, but found none. The mother's voice rose one last time, cutting through the roar. Today the silence ends. Today every parent will know, every student will remember, and those who allowed this will face the truth. Her voice was thunder, and the hallway trembled with it. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. The principal lowered his head. The teacher froze in fear, and the students chanted louder. The girl squeezed her mother's hand, her heart steady. She realized this was no longer just her story. It was theirs. Every child who had been broken, every voice that had been silenced, and together they had found their strength. The storm had arrived, and there was no turning back. The mother's jaw tightened, her chest rising and falling with fury. She reached out and touched the boy's shoulder softly. "You were brave to bring this," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. The boy's eyes lowered, guilt in his voice. "I should have stopped it. I should have said something sooner, but I was scared." His voice broke. The girl looked at him with tears in her eyes, but she shook her head softly, whispering, "You're helping now." "That's what matters." The principal's face flushed red, his voice rising with panic. "This is private property. Recording in classrooms is against policy. That video cannot be used." But the mother's glare silenced him, her voice fierce. "That video is proof of your teacher's cruelty and your failure to stop it. Do not dare to tell me it cannot be used." Her words thundered through the office. The boy nodded quickly, holding the phone tighter. "There are more," he admitted, his voice steadier now. "Other students recorded her, not just today, but other times too." The mother froze, her eyes narrowing. "Other times?" she asked, her voice heavy. The boy nodded, his hands trembling. "She targeted kids, the quiet ones, the ones she thought wouldn't fight back. She cut hair, she mocked accents, she made some of us cry, we told people. But nothing ever happened." The girl's stomach twisted, her mind flashing back to faces she had seen broken, quiet classmates who never spoke again after being called out. It all made sense now. The principal stood, his voice desperate. "This is dangerous. You don't know what you're doing. These accusations." But the mother cut him off sharply. "Accusations? No, these are truths you buried, truths held in the pockets of children you silenced, truths that will burn this house of lies to the ground." Her voice shook with righteous rage. Her daughter's eyes widened, her chest swelling with pride. For the first time, she felt the shame shift into something else. Justice. The boy stepped closer, his phone still in his hand, his voice firmer. "She scared us, but we're not scared anymore." His eyes met the girl's shaved head, and his voice grew stronger. "Not after what she did today. We can't stay quiet." The mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes blazing. "Good," she said firmly, "because silence is how she survived this long. But now the silence is broken." The principal sank back into his chair, his mask slipping further, sweat on his brow, his voice hollow. "You don't know what storm you're bringing. You think you'll win, but the board protects her. The system protects her." His eyes flickered toward the mother. "They won't let this destroy them." But the mother leaned forward, her face inches from his, her voice low and powerful. "Then let them come. Because storms don't scare me. I am the storm." The girl's hand tightened around her mother's. Her eyes shining, the boy looked between them, his courage rising in the fire of the mother's words. He nodded. "I'll show this video to everyone. To parents, to students, to anyone who will listen." The principal's eyes widened with fear. But the mother did not stop him. She encouraged him. "Do it," she said firmly. "The truth deserves to be seen." The office felt alive with energy. No longer suffocating silence, but the birth of resistance. The girl sat taller, her bare head no longer a mark of shame, but a symbol. Her mother's fire and the boy's courage weaving together into something powerful. Unstoppable, the principal sat in defeat. His warnings empty now, his authority crumbling. And outside the door, the whispers grew louder. Footsteps gathering, students waiting. The mother straightened, her hand still holding her daughter's, her voice strong and final. This is no longer about one child. This is about every child you failed to protect, every voice you silenced. And today those voices rise. She looked down at her daughter with pride, then back at the principal. And you will answer for it. Every last one of you who let this happen. The boy's phone screen still glowed, the video frozen on the image of the teacher's cruel face. The girl looked at it and felt her shame burn away. What was once her humiliation had now become the weapon to bring down the cruelty. And as the clock ticked in the office, the suspense thick in the air. It was clear the battle was no longer hidden. It was spreading, louder, bigger, and it would not be stopped. The principal's office felt smaller than before, the air thick with tension. The boy still stood with his phone in hand, the mother's eyes sharp as steel, her daughter's hand wrapped tightly around hers, and the principal sat behind his desk, his face pale, his mask of control breaking piece by piece. Outside the door, faint whispers and footsteps echoed, word of the confrontation spreading like fire. The walls could no longer contain the storm brewing inside. The mother's voice was steady, her tone heavy with command. You will not bury this, not this time. These children have been silenced long enough. The principal shook his head, his voice low. You don't understand what forces you're going against. But before he could finish, the office door opened again. The secretary hesitated in the frame. Fear on her face, and behind her stood another figure. An older staff member, a man who had worked in the school for years. His uniform slightly wrinkled, his eyes tired but burning with something deeper. He stepped forward, ignoring the principal's glare. His voice quiet but strong. She's telling the truth. The room froze. The mother turned to face him. Her daughter's breath caught. Even the boy's eyes widened. The man looked at the mother directly. You're right, there have been complaints. Many of them. I filed some myself, but every time they disappeared. Every report was closed before it left this office. He glanced at the principal, his jaw tight. And I was warned to stay silent if I wanted to keep my job. The principal slammed his hand on the desk, his voice sharp. Enough, this is not your business. Leave now. But the man didn't flinch. His voice grew louder. It is my business. I've watched her break children down year after year. I've seen students walk out of her classroom in tears. I've seen parents complain and get ignored, and I've carried the guilt of saying nothing because I was afraid. His voice trembled but didn't waver. But today I won't be silent anymore. The mother's eyes softened as she looked at him. Her voice calm but filled with respect. Thank you, she said. Her daughter's chest swelled with something new. Not just pride, but relief. She was not alone, others had seen it too. Others had carried the same burden, and now they were speaking. The boy tightened his grip on his phone, his courage growing. The principal's face reddened, his voice desperate. Do you understand what you're doing? You're tearing this school apart. You'll ruin us all. But the staff member stepped closer, his voice firm. No, you ruined it the moment you protected her. The moment you let cruelty replace teaching. The moment you chose silence over justice. His eyes burned with long-suppressed anger. You don't deserve this position. You don't deserve their trust. The girl sat silently. But her heart pounded, her mother's hand squeezing hers. She watched as the truth unraveled, each voice adding strength to the fight. The office no longer felt suffocating. It felt like the walls were cracking, breaking under the weight of truth that could not be held down. The mother turned back to the principal, her voice low but filled with power. You can feel it, can't you? The silence breaking, the lies crumbling. She gestured to the staff member, to the boy with the phone, to her daughter by her side. This is bigger than you, bigger than her. This is about justice that you tried to bury. And justice will not stay buried. The principal sank into his chair, his hands trembling slightly, his voice no longer sharp but hollow. You don't understand, he whispered. The board, they expect results, they want order. They praise her for her strictness. They protect her because she delivers what they want. They don't care about the cost. The mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Then let them come defend her. Let them stand in front of cameras and tell parents that cruelty is their version of education. Her voice cut like a blade. I would love to see them try, the staff member nodded. His voice steady. She's right if parents knew. If the community knew, none of you could hide anymore. He glanced at the principal. You've kept us afraid, but fear doesn't last forever. Not when the truth is this ugly. The boy stepped forward, holding his phone higher. The video is already out there. People are sharing it right now. The principal's eyes widened with horror, his hand reaching across the desk as if he could snatch the truth back. But it was too late. The principal's office was thick with silence, the kind that pressed against the walls and made every breath louder. The mother stood tall, her daughter seated beside her. The air heavy with tension, the principal leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the polished wood of his desk. His eyes shifting between the girl's shaved head and the fire in her mother's eyes. He wanted to speak, but his words stuck. Every excuse he had sounded weak even in his own mind. The mother broke the silence first, her voice sharp. You knew, didn't you? She said, her words cutting like glass. You had complaints, you had warnings, you had files, but you chose to protect her. She stepped closer to the desk, her hand pointing at him like a blade. How many children has she humiliated before mine? How many voices have you silenced? The principal's jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked down at the files on his desk as if the papers might save him. The girl's heart pounded, her fingers clutching the arms of the chair. She watched her mother's face, strong and unshaken. And for the first time she felt that maybe they were not powerless. Maybe this fight could be won. The principal finally cleared his throat, his voice steady but low. There are rules, there are processes. Every complaint must go through channels. Sometimes those channels do not lead to action. He looked up, his eyes meeting the mother's. It is not as simple as you think, the mother laughed. But it was a cold laugh filled with disbelief. Not simple, she said, her voice rising. It is simple. A teacher used violence and humiliation against children and you buried it under paperwork. You let her stand in front of students as if she was fit to teach. You let her believe she had power. And today, my daughter paid the price for your cowardice. The principal's face tightened, but his shoulders slumped slightly, her words striking where his defenses were weakest. The girl shifted in her seat, her small hand brushing against her mother's arm, whispering softly, Mom, maybe we should just leave. But her mother shook her head firmly, her eyes still locked on the man behind the desk. No, sweetheart, she said gently but with steel in her tone. We don't leave. Not this time. We make sure this never happens again. Her daughter's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of shame. They were tears of pride. The principal exhaled slowly, his eyes darting to the door as if he feared someone might hear. His voice dropped. You don't understand. She has protection. His words hung in the air like poison. The mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Protection? From who? She asked sharply, her voice heavy with suspicion. The principal shook his head, his voice lower still. There are people on the board, people who think her strict methods bring results. They cover for her every time a complaint is filed. It disappears, the girl gasped, her stomach twisting. She thought back to the faces of students who had once looked broken, who had gone quiet after staying late in class. She had always wondered, but now she understood. It was not the first time, it would not have been the last. Her mother's face darkened, her voice a whisper filled with rage. So you let her continue because it was easier, because you were afraid of the board, because children's dignity meant less than your position. The principal's silence was answer enough. He looked down, ashamed, his fingers drumming on the desk. The mother straightened, her voice cold and final. Then I will not go through your channels. I will not trust your broken system. I will take this higher. I will take this to the board, to the press, to anyone who will listen. She leaned closer, her eyes burning. And I will make sure every parent knows what you've allowed in these walls. The girl's heart raced. She felt her mother's words like fire. The suspense in the room tightened. The principal's mask of calm finally cracked. He sat forward, his voice desperate. "If you go public, it will destroy the school's reputation. It will bring chaos, please. Think of the students." But the mother's eyes flashed, her voice cutting him down. "Think of the students? That's exactly what I'm doing. You should have thought of them before you let her destroy them." The principal's face reddened, his voice rising. "You don't know the pressure I face, the threats, the politics." But the mother slammed her hand on the desk, the sound like a gunshot. "I don't care about your politics," she snapped. "I care about my daughter and every child who walked into that classroom afraid of a teacher who was supposed to protect them." The girl flinched at the sound, but her heart swelled with pride. Her mother was unshaken, unstoppable. The door to the office suddenly creaked open. The secretary peeked in nervously, her eyes darting between them. "Sir, there's someone here," she whispered. Her voice nervous, the principal waved her away, but not before the mother caught the look of fear in her eyes. Something was happening outside. The tension grew heavier. The girl's stomach twisted with dread and curiosity. What else was waiting beyond that door? The mother turned back to the principal, her voice firm. "This is not over, not by a long shot. I will not rest until she is removed. Until every parent knows the truth." The principal lowered his head, his voice quiet. "You don't understand what you're starting?" But the mother leaned closer, her voice like steel. "Oh, I understand perfectly. And that's what scares you?" The girl sat quietly. But her heart beat faster. She knew her mother had shaken the principal. She knew secrets were spilling. The files, the board, the protection. It was bigger than one cruel teacher. It was a system built to hide her crimes, but now the cracks were showing, and her mother was ready to tear them wide open. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it burned a fire. The girl's head was bare. Her pride had been stolen in front of her classmates. But now, in this room, something powerful was happening. Her mother had turned shame into strength. And as the clock ticked on the wall, it was clear the fight had only begun. The storm outside the classroom was spreading, and soon, everyone would feel it. The clock in the principal's office ticked louder with each passing second. Every sound heavy, the mother stood tall in front of the desk, her daughter sitting quietly but straighter than before. The principal shifted in his chair, his hands folded together, his eyes showing cracks of fear behind the mask of calm. Outside the closed door, whispers and footsteps echoed, the story already spilling into the halls. The tension was suffocating, but it was clear the silence would not hold for long. The mother's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You are finished hiding her crimes. No more excuses, no more folders buried under dust. Today this ends." Her words were sharp, final. Her daughter felt strength flow into her. The shame of her bare head still lingered, but her mother's fire was burning away the weakness. She looked at the desk, at the files stacked neatly, knowing those papers held truths buried too long. Suddenly, a soft knock came at the office door. The principal stiffened, his shoulders tensing. Before he could speak, the door creaked open and a student stepped inside. His hands shaking, his face pale, he clutched a phone tightly, his eyes darting between the mother, the principal, and the girl sitting in the chair. I need to say something." His voice cracked, but he stood firm. The mother turned to him, her expression softening slightly while the principal's face darkened. "Not now," the principal said quickly, his voice sharp. "This is not your place." But the mother raised a hand, silencing him, her eyes fixed on the boy. "Go ahead," she said gently. "Tell me." The boy swallowed hard, his voice shaking. I have a video." He raised the phone slowly, his thumb trembling over the screen. "Of what she did. Of everything she's done." The girl's breath caught. Her eyes widening, the mother leaned forward. Her heart pounding, the boy pressed play, and the small device lit up. The sound of buzzing clippers filled the room again. The teacher's voice cold, the cruel laughter of classmates. The sight of the girl standing frozen as her hair fell to the floor. The video captured it all. The humiliation, the tears in her eyes, the smirk on the teacher's face. The silence in the office grew heavier, every frame of the recording pulling the truth into the light. The girl blinked, her tears finally spilling down her cheeks, not from shame, but from the fierce strength she felt radiating from her mother. The teacher lowered her eyes. For the first time, she looked small, powerless, and weak. The buzzing clippers slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. The sound made the students jump. The mother turned slowly, her hand reaching for her daughter, her fingers brushing against her cheek. "I'm here now," she whispered, her voice softer, filled with love. The girl leaned into her mother's hand, her lips trembling. "Mom," she said quietly, her first word since the humiliation began. The teacher tried to recover, her voice shaking. "I can explain this. I can—" "The principal!" But before she could finish, the mother spun back toward her, her voice loud again. "Yes, the principal. We will see him now." She took her daughter's hand firmly, her eyes never leaving the teacher's. "You will answer for this. Every lock of hair on this floor is proof of what you've done. Every child here is a witness." The students stirred, heads nodding, whispers spreading like fire. The weight of silence was gone now, replaced by a buzz of fear and tension. The girl's mother guided her toward the door, but stopped just before stepping out. She turned one last time, her eyes burning into the teacher's. "You thought you were strong when you held those clippers. But true strength is not found in cruelty. True strength is standing up for what is right. And today, your mask has fallen." The teacher stood frozen, her hands trembling, her mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. The girl and her mother walked through the door, and as it closed behind them, the classroom erupted in whispers, some shocked, some scared, some relieved. The students knew they had just witnessed something that would not be forgotten, something that would spread far beyond the walls of that room. The video, still hidden in pockets and phones, would soon make its way outside. The girl's head was bare, but she no longer felt empty. She felt the warmth of her mother's hand. She felt the fire in her mother's voice. She felt the weight of protection and the promise of justice. The hallway stretched before them, and though fear lingered, there was also something else. A sense that the story had only begun, and that the teacher who once stood tall would soon be the one answering to powers far greater than her own. And back in the classroom, the teacher slumped against the desk, her eyes darting around, realizing too late that the humiliation she thought she had given would soon return to her tenfold. Because the mother was not just angry, she was determined, and her storm had only just begun. The mother's grip on her daughter's hand was strong as they walked down the hallway, the fluorescent lights above flickering faintly as if they too sensed the weight of the moment. The girl kept her head lowered, still shaken, but she felt the steady pull of her mother's hand guiding her, giving her courage she thought she had lost. Behind them, the classroom door closed with a sharp click, sealing in the shame, sealing in the teacher who had thought she could humiliate and escape. Every step toward the principal's office was heavy. Each echo of their shoes bounced against the lockers, students peeking from half-open doors, whispering, eyes wide as they saw the sight, a mother with fire in her eyes and a child with a bare head and tears down her cheeks. The whispers grew louder. The hallway seemed alive with the buzz of rumor, phones already in hands, messages sent in haste. She shaved her head. "Her mom is here. It's about to explode." The girl glanced up once, catching her reflection in the glass of a trophy case. The bald patches, the streaks of tears, her lips quivering. For a second, the shame returned, and she wanted to hide her face, but her mother squeezed her hand tighter. "Don't look down," her mother whispered firmly. "They will see your strength, not your weakness." The girl swallowed hard and nodded, pulling herself straighter, though her heart still pounded like a drum inside her chest. When they reached the principal's office, the secretary stood up quickly, startled by the storm on the mother's face. "Can I—" she began, but the mother cut her off with a sharp gesture, her voice sharp as glass. "Where is he?" The secretary hesitated, stuttering. He's in a meeting." But the mother's stare made her crumble. She turned and knocked on the closed office door, her knuckles trembling against the wood. Inside, muffled voices stopped, the door opened, and the principal stepped out, tall, his suit pressed neat, his face calm but his eyes widening slightly when he saw the mother and the girl. His gaze lingered on the shaved head, the red eyes, the trembling lips. His face shifted, but only for a moment before he smoothed it into a practiced mask. "Mrs.?" he began politely, but the mother raised her voice, her words cutting him off like a blade. "No, not polite words, not excuses. I want answers," she said, her voice steady, filling the hallway. "Look at my daughter. Look at what your teacher has done. She humiliated her in front of her classmates. She stripped her head bare. She stripped her pride. And you will tell me why this was allowed, why she was allowed to touch my child. The principal's jaw tightened. His hands folded neatly in front of him. He gestured for them to step inside his office. The office was large, filled with books, plaques, and certificates on the walls, but none of it could hide the tension. The mother guided her daughter to a chair, but remained standing herself. Her eyes locked on the principal, her voice still sharp. Do not tell me this is discipline. Do not tell me this is policy. I know cruelty when I see it, and today it stood in a classroom with clippers in her hand. The girl sat quietly, her eyes darting around the room. The polished desk, the faint ticking of the clock. Her heart racing, the principal sat down slowly, folding his hands together. I understand you're upset, he began carefully. His voice measured, but the mother leaned forward, slamming her palm on his desk. The sound made the pens rattle. Upset? She spat. My daughter was humiliated, laughed at, shamed, her hair ripped away in front of everyone. She will carry this memory longer than you can imagine, and you want to call it upset? The girl's chest swelled with emotion as she watched her mother stand so tall, so unshaken, she had never seen her this fierce. The principal cleared his throat, his calm cracking slightly. There have been reports, he said carefully, of students not following dress codes, of disruptions. The mother's laugh cut him off, sharp and bitter. Dress code? Show me where it says a teacher can shave a child's head. Show me where it says humiliation is an acceptable punishment. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. Or is it easier for you to look the other way when it's my child? When it's children like her? The principal stiffened, his lips tightening, silence stretched. The girl's stomach twisted, the room heavy with the weight of what was unspoken. Finally, the mother spoke again, her voice lower but even more dangerous. I saw the folder in your office. The complaints, the warnings do not lie to me. She has done this before, hasn't she? And every time you buried it. The principal's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. The girl gasped softly, her small hand clutching the armrest of her chair. Her mother had struck truth. The principal leaned back, his mask cracking, his voice lower now. This is more complicated than you know, he said. But the mother's voice cut through him again. No, it's simple. A teacher abused her power. And you allowed it? You hid it? You protected her? She stepped back, her voice rising. Well, not this time, not my daughter. Not again! The girl's heart raced, her eyes darting between her mother and the principal. Suspense building like a storm about to break. She could feel it in the room. The truth pressing against the walls. Waiting to explode, the principal sighed, his hand brushing against a stack of files, his face heavy with something between guilt and fear. The mother's eyes narrowed. Who are you protecting? She asked sharply. Why is she still here after everything? The principal said nothing. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, each second stretching longer. The girl leaned closer to her mother, whispering softly, Mom, what if they don't listen? Her mother bent down, brushing her cheek gently, her voice firm but warm. Then we make them listen, she said, her eyes never leaving the man behind the desk. The silence deepened, but in that silence, the girl felt the power shift. Her mother's words cut through the fear. She realized that the storm was only beginning, that the teacher's cruelty was not an accident. It was part of something bigger, something hidden, and her mother was about to drag it all into the light. Outside the office door, students whispered, waiting, recording, the story spreading like fire through the halls, and inside the mother's eyes burned with determination. Her voice steady, her hand tight around her daughter's. You will answer for this, and so will she. This ends now. The suspense hung heavy, the truth about to unravel, and the walls of silence that had stood for so long were ready to crack wide open. The classroom was full of noise, but it was not the usual noise of young voices learning. It was a cruel kind of laughter mixed with whispers, a sound that pressed heavy against the walls. At the front of the room, a girl stood frozen, her small hands trembling by her side. She was quiet, her dark eyes lowered to the floor as if she wanted to disappear. The teacher stood close, holding a pair of electric clippers in her hand. The buzzing started, sharp and angry, and the sound cut through the air like thunder. Some of the students gasped, but many leaned forward with excited smiles, phones hidden under desks ready to capture what was about to happen. The girl did not move, her shoulders stiff, her lips pressed together in silence. The teacher gave no warning, no kind words, no reason that could make sense. With one quick push, the clippers touched the girl's head. Black strands of hair fell to the floor, slow at first, then more and more, each lock slipping down her shoulders and landing in a pile around her feet. The sound of the clippers grew louder, drowning out the whispers. But not the laughter. The students snickered, some hiding their mouths behind their hands, others pointing and shaking their heads. They whispered cruel things, words sharp like knives. The girl's chest rose and fell fast, but she refused to cry. She held the tears in her eyes, refusing to give the teacher the pleasure. The teacher's face showed a twisted satisfaction, her mouth tight but her eyes cold. Every pass of the clippers stripped away more of the girl's hair, more of her pride. The buzzing echoed in the classroom, the lights above flickering slightly as if even the room itself felt uneasy. The girl tried to steady herself, but her knees felt weak. She closed her eyes, pretending she was somewhere else, anywhere but here, but the sound followed her. Every second stretched longer, the cruel ritual dragging time. Some students who watched grew uncomfortable. One or two lowered their phones, guilt pulling at them, but none spoke. The weight of silence was heavy, only broken by the laughter of the louder ones. They treated it like a show, a performance. Forgetting that a person stood there, humiliated and broken, the girl's hair lay on the floor like fallen feathers, dark against the white tiles. The teacher stepped back for a moment, brushing her hands together as if she had done something important. She looked at the girl, now almost bald. Her head uneven and bare, she tilted her chin up with a finger. Forcing her to meet her eyes, the girl flinched but said nothing. Her lips trembling but locked shut, the teacher sneered, saying only a short line about teaching discipline, the words cold and cruel. The class burst into whispers again, some shocked, some thrilled. The girl wanted to scream. She wanted to run, but her legs stayed still, her body frozen like stone. She thought of her mother. She thought of the mornings when her mother brushed her hair gently, telling her she was beautiful, telling her that her hair was her crown. Now that crown lay scattered on the floor, stomped by laughter and cruelty. Her chest burned with shame, but she still did not cry. She would not give them that victory. The teacher lifted the clippers again, moving to clean the last patches, and the girl's head tilted slightly, the buzzing once again filling the silence. The students leaned in, phones still recording, flashes of light blinking as cameras captured the moment. The air felt heavy, the walls seemed to close in, as if the classroom itself was holding its breath. The girl's heart raced, pounding so loud she thought everyone could hear it. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wanted the moment to end. She wanted to wake up and find it was all a dream. But the cruel buzz kept pulling her back into reality. She focused on the sound of her own breath, slow, shaking, almost broken. And then it came, the sound that cut through everything. The creak of the classroom door. It was small at first, just a hinge moving, but it was enough. The laughter slowed, the whispers stopped. The teacher's hand froze in midair. Holding the clippers just above the girl's head, the girl's eyes widened, hope and fear mixing together. Her body stiff, her breath caught in her chest. The students turned their heads toward the door, some still holding their phones, some lowering them quickly. Their faces pale now. The door opened wider, and footsteps echoed into the room. Slow, strong, each step like a drum beat. The girl dared to look up for the first time, her tears finally spilling over, but not from shame. This time it was something else, something burning inside her chest. The teacher lowered the clippers slowly, her face shifting from power to panic. The buzzing sound stopped. The silence was thick. The mother had arrived. Still holding her work bag, her eyes scanning the scene, taking in the pile of hair on the floor, the clippers in the teacher's hand, and the broken pride on her daughter's face. Her lips parted, but no words came yet. Her body stiff with shock, the room held its breath. Every student frozen in place, even the teacher for the first time. Could not find her voice. The girl stood taller now. As if the strength of her mother's presence held her up, the cruel laughter was gone. Replaced by fear, by suspense, the buzzing had stopped. But its echo lingered in every heart. The classroom was no longer just a classroom. It was a stage of shame, and the story was about to turn, because the mother was here, and nothing would stay the same. The silence in the classroom was heavy. Every student sat frozen as if the air itself had turned solid. The girl stood in front of the class, her head almost bare, small patches of hair clinging to her scalp, her eyes watery but defiant. And in the doorway stood her mother, her chest rising and falling slowly, her hand still clutching her work bag, her gaze locked on the teacher who still held the buzzing clippers. The teacher's face had drained of color, her confident smirk gone, her fingers trembling as she clicked the switch to turn the machine off. The sound died, but the weight of what had been done filled every corner of the room. The mother stepped inside, her shoes clicking on the tiled floor. Each step sharper than the last, the room was so quiet that even the faint creak of the floor echoed like thunder. The students lowered their eyes. Some slipped their phones into their bags quickly. Afraid of being caught recording, others kept still, watching with wide eyes as if they were about to see something unforgettable. The girl's breath hitched as her mother stopped just a few feet away from her. The mother's eyes softened for a second as she looked at her daughter. Her shaved head, the fallen hair on the floor like ashes. Her hand shook slightly, but when she turned back to the teacher, her face was carved in stone. "Who gave you the right to touch my child?" Her voice was low, steady, and filled with a fury that made the teacher step back. The teacher opened her mouth, but no sound came. She looked at the students, as if searching for support, but none dared to speak. The mother's voice grew stronger, each word slicing through the silence. "You humiliated her, you stripped her dignity, and you dared to stand there as if you were teaching a lesson." The teacher finally spoke, her voice thin and nervous. It was discipline. She broke the rules, the school handbook." But before she could finish, the mother raised her hand, her eyes blazing. "Do not insult me with excuses. You call this discipline? You call this education? You call cruelty a lesson?" Her voice shook the room. The girl felt her knees weaken. But this time it was not from fear. It was from the weight of her mother's protection. Her chest swelled with something she had almost forgotten: hope. The students shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their heads in shame. They had laughed. They had recorded. And now they wished they had stopped it. One boy in the back clenched his fists, his phone still in his pocket, the video heavy like a stone. He wanted to speak, but fear glued his lips shut. The mother's anger filled every shadow, her voice sharp and relentless. "If this is what you call teaching, then you are not a teacher. You are a bully in a position of power." The teacher's eyes darted toward the door. As if searching for escape, sweat gathered at her temple. Her fingers gripped the clippers tightly, trying to find control again. "You don't understand," she muttered. "There are standards. Appearances must be maintained. Order." But her words only made things worse. The mother stepped closer, so close that the teacher had to lean back. Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "The only thing that needs order here is justice.